Hello. So, it might surprise people who've watched a few of my videos. I'm a bit of an Allan Holdsworth fan, believe it or not. My playing resembles Holdsworth hardly at all. But I do find like putting small amounts of legato in my playing really good for helping with the phrasing. For instance, I might play a bebop scale like with a little bit of legato in it, just to kind of help it flow. A simple example, or I'm always kind of, So I think most players can be sort of seen as being a sort of spectrum of how much you pick to how much you slur, with kind of maybe a gypsy jazz guitarist like Stockelo Rosenberg on one extreme of the spectrum, and Allan Holdsworth on the other. And I think a lot of jazz guitarists fall in between. It depends what kind of music I'm playing. If I'm playing a electric guitar with a lighter setup, I'm going to do a lot more legato. However, when practicing pure legato, which is not something I tend to use often in my playing, I quite like to borrow a few phrases from Allan because they tend to be finger busters. So I've looked into his solo 116 Men of Tame, for instance, which is, in my opinion, an absolute masterpiece. And his speed licks are so finger busting to me and difficult. I think they are to most people. That they make for good practice. So really you want to make sure that you're properly warmed up before trying this. Right, so a few caveats in terms of actually not hurting yourself when you're playing legato. I mean, I'm using quite heavy strings here, which is probably a bad idea. But really it's all about placement. So like the placement of my little finger is super important. If I play it on its side, like this, I can't get the traction I need to pull off. Whereas if my fingers are absolutely square, or as square as I can physiologically be, and my finger is on the pad like that, then I can do the quick little movement that I need to do to make that pull off. Now the problem is I naturally play with my hand quite pronated like this, you see, whereas it needs to be more like that. So if I'm playing this major 7th arpeggio, for instance, well, that's trivial. Coming down is always a tricky bit. Down. So that's fine. So that is the trick, right? So to me, legato is no longer a question of like how strong your hand is, but how accurately you're placing your little finger, because that movement is actually not too hard when you've got your finger in the right place. I know a lot of people struggle pulling their fourth finger off to their third. It's kind of, there's good physiological reasons why that's difficult. But I find if I do that, if I precisely position my finger well enough, then it's not a problem. So that leads us to things like if I play a descending chromatic scale, so you can hear that it's not exactly in time. This is where these things get a little bit tricky. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Oh, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and. So you're aiming really for evenness and I suppose in timeness and control. So in that case, it's like I'm waking each finger up in turn. And trying to avoid any tension in my fretting hand. So that is quite tricky, I find. I'm better at it now than when I started. Even more tricky is this one, where we're just going to play the fingering pattern 4-3-1. We're not going to think about the notes at all. Of course, for the last exercise, by the way, you can just do it straight across like that. And of course, as it gets into the lower strings, it becomes harder. You might want to try this sort of thing, where you go. you know, where you're going up and down. That's tricky for me. Oh, sorry. But at least I know exactly what the bottleneck is. The problem is me getting my little finger down in an accurate enough position that I can affect that pull-off. You may find you have similar problems when you do it, or not, depending on how good your left-hand fretting is. Okay, so moving on. This exercise, which is similar, but I'm just missing out the second finger. Again, I'm not doing a huge amount. Now that definitely starts to cramp my hand up a little bit, so I'm not going to do too much of that. This movement, wow, I can feel the burn with that. But like I'm kind of feeling it more in my arm and shoulder than in my fingers, which I think might be a good thing. I don't know. To do that accurately is difficult. Holdsworth had a lot of these kind of stretch fingerings, which are based on this kind of stuff, but kind of extended out. So if I do... Yeah, so that's even more challenging from the point of view of like, you know, I'm on 9th, 10th and 12th here for everything. So the problem of that is just to make sure that you, again, position your little finger right. And I'm finding my hand is not used to doing that at all. Yeah, there's a few other things. I mean, like this is a nice exercise based on a lick from 16 Minute Tane. This is pull off with your second and first. So we're going to start on second finger on 7th fret. Then third and second. Then the fourth. And you can do this across the strings. You know, obviously you can do it like we have been doing with all the other exercises. Like that. Like that. Or you could, as Allan does, go up a fret each time. He doesn't actually play tritones, because when he gets to the third and second strings, he just continues as if the guitar was tuned in perfect fourths. And I think a lot of Allan's playing is actually based out of the shapes on the guitar, especially his fast stuff. He's quite famously quoted as saying anything sounds good as long as it's played fast. And I think although he has some harmonic kind of thinking going on in his slower playing, when he's playing fast often it's just he's just kind of going in and out and using the fingerings that he's worked on the guitar, almost, I think, without thinking, or at least he was, because he's no longer with us, sadly. That's the impression I get, just looking at his stuff. I mean, I think it's kind of the thing that Allan's playing kind of defies analysis, and I think that might be part of the reason. For him, I think he just does what sounds good to him, and that's often stuff which isn't like music theory well behaved, if that makes any sense, or well behaved under the rules of music theory. So this is another one. So we start on the 7th fret on this string, then we start on the 8th fret on this string. We keep doing it. We can obviously start on, we can do all the strings. He doesn't do that in the solo. Actually starts 7, 8, so he goes like this. He goes sorry. So he goes. Oh, I'm pronating again. So you can see my hands going like that. That's not right. Now you're probably kind of aware of the fact that I'm not doing this very well. That's because this video is actually showing me practicing this stuff. I'm not a legato player, as I mentioned before. If you want to go and check out some legato players, there's some very impressive ones, like is it Daryl Garbell? Is that how you say his name? And Tom Quayle and so on and so forth. They're all great players. This is not really my bag. So why am I demonstrating it? Because I think it's useful for developing the accuracy of your fingering. And of course, you know, if you have the capacity to do legato, then you can always incorporate that into your technique, which is kind of my aim, rather than becoming a sort of legato player like Allan Holdsworth. As I think the problem with doing the Allan Holdsworth thing, especially with these sort of speed licks, is that you end up sounding like Allan Holdsworth. And I think most of the legato players who are kind of really good today, like Tim Miller, have been quite adroit at, or that's how you say that word, quite good at avoiding that by not playing these ideas. But I'm sure they know them because they're very obviously influenced by Allan. So anyway, here's another one. It's a little bit easier. So I'm going to start on the 11th fret, go on to the next string up. So starting on G string, 11th fret. So this is actually a bit easier. You know, so that's a good little exercise. It's like just chromatic sort of exercise. Obviously played at about twice that speed. But I don't see any obvious bottlenecks when I get the coordination together. You know, I think that'd probably go quite quickly. You know, because you're really only going. And you can do that with an upstroke or a downstroke as you prefer. So it's a kind of variation on that, isn't it? Yeah. My problem is pronating the hand and not hammering down my fourth finger accurately enough, as you can see. You know. So, I mean, I'm not here to sort of gosh wow impress you with my chops on this stuff, but rather to show how I would go about practicing it. Another lick which is quite fun is a lot easier to play. That's diminished lick, which is like this. This is on a Marshall Harrison video, I think. Is Marshall Harrison, or maybe it's Daryl Gabble, I can't remember. You do a hammer on with the first finger. Then that's a pattern. So if I'm going to read out the fretboard numbers, the tab, it's 9, 10, 13, right? So you're on the G string, you're on the E string. And again, it's a good, I find, exercise for me to get that. That's pretty twangy. Do you see what I mean? It's like another thing that Allan was quite famous saying is he hated that meow sound we get when you pull off, which I think people interpret to feel like he never pulled off, but I think that's the sound he was avoiding, and actually you don't need to do that. As long as your movements are sharp enough. And again, that comes back to the positioning of the little finger. Ah, it's rubbish. Right, my hand's getting a bit tired, so I'm going to stop that now. Thanks for watching. Post any comments below. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to practice.